Roland Barthes' 1957 interrogation of a rapidly evolving post-war French culture supplied ideas on visual analysis that undoubtedly still resonate today. Barthes' ideas were a doorway into the area of semiotics, or structuralism as it's often known as. This was a linguistic-based idea which was subsequently expanded into culture, art, media and the surrounding world. What Barthes posited was that language itself was not innate but was subject to cultural, authorial, contextual, reception and perception factors, i.e. a web of influences and interrelating perceptions of a specific idea or artifact. Roland Barthes suggested that the image itself could never be a fixed site of meaning, or could be read in any definitive sense. He felt the image existed through subjective interpretation and reinterpretation, positioned within interconnecting values. For Barthes felt that assessing the context of an image was important as considering its appearance, and he saw this as the key to anchor any credible reading of that image. He suggested that things in themselves, or images themselves, perhaps have no inherent meaning, but more they exist from year to year, from situation to situation, on how they are agreed to be perceived. What Barthes was talking about was setting up a kind of meta-language, a meta-system, taking into account the meaning outside the image, which posited that the image was more than just a literal representation. As he said, pictures become a kind of writing as soon as they are meaningful. So to assess meaning and to probably illustrate what Barthes means, let's talk about this three-stage process, which has led into very dense academic studies. But I think really the actual basis of it, the structure of it, is very useful if you're embarking on any textual analysis at all. The first stage he calls the signifier. The signifier means denoting the object's manifestation or appearance, the index, describing it, free of any information other than what is there in front of you. From there, the reader then must account for the context of the object, i.e. the signified, which actually in some ways is the most important stage, because this is the set of factors which affect how the object is read. And then finally, conjoining the two stages, signifier and signified, we have the sign. And here is where we account for the symbolic connotations, the larger cultural readings of a particular image. In his book Mythologies, he talked about the signifier, the signified and the sign. And he applied that model to discussing things like the Eiffel Tower, which if you think about it is the kind of myth that Barthes was talking about. Remember, the Eiffel Tower is a structure, it's a real thing. It was created by Gustave Eiffel in 1887 as the entrance to the 1889 World Fair, the Exposition Universelle. But of course, our understanding of the Eiffel Tower has been refracted through endless variations, deviations, abbreviations, different contexts. The Eiffel Tower itself can mean so many different things to different people. Love, nationhood, stability, innovation, all sorts of different connotations are brought to the image. To illustrate this process in operation even further, I'll talk about a very famous still taken from George Lucas's science fantasy film Star Wars from the original release in 1977. I'll be using one of the first publicity stills which was circulated globally and which has become indelibly associated with the film's original release. To start with the signifier. Here the signifier can be seen as a photograph depicting a bleached out space, divided by a single horizon line. Its top segment is defined by a solid blue colour field. The bottom half is clearly light brown desert sand, imprinted by signs of movement. To the right of the frame are items of machinery and pipework that appear to extend from under the ground and infer a sense of agriculture or light industry. Slightly out of focus and further back towards the horizon line, with the details obscured through distance, are what look like two alien pieces of equipment that share the same used and battered aesthetic, i.e. both functional and yet fantastical. In the foreground of the image are two objects. One more on the left of the frame is a human-like figure, clad in tarnished golden metal. He's striking a stiff pose, his joints and limbs appear mechanical and operated by a set of plausible-looking hydraulic mechanisms. His features are minimal. His eyes are headlights, his mouth a small open slot, and his face is moulded to resemble a human face. On our right of the frame is a smaller white and blue cylinder, which is too dusty, battered and discoloured, and is perched on two similarly designed legs that appear fed by lubricated hoses from the blocks or the feet. This object has a single camera lens on its domed head. Now we've denoted the object in a way that hopefully you wouldn't actually need to see the picture itself. You should get a kind of idea of what's actually happening in the frame. Problems I think people have when they come to this model is they miss this part out. And if you think about it, that's the part you take for granted. If you don't tell us what the signifier is, how can you get to the signified? Don't assume that that information is not worth taking any note of. It's a foundation. It's part of that process. We've denoted it. We've provided an index. That's the signifier. What's the signified? What is this in cultural and historical terms? Simply put, what is it a picture of? Now this is a steal from the 1977 film Star Wars. And this is pre the New Hope version of Star Wars. This is pre all the various different sequels and prequels. This is a very prominent publicity still from the period. The two figures are robots, C-3PO and R2-D2, and they are played in the film by the British actors Anthony Daniels and Kenny Baker. Released by 20th Century Fox on May 25th, 1977, Star Wars became the largest phenomenon of that year with an initial $307 million US box office gross, and the images dominated the contemporary television and print media landscape. So potent has the myth, if we can lean back to Barthes there, of Star Wars become within global cinema, that when Lucasfilm was sold to the Disney Corporation for $4.5 billion in 2012, it subsequently spawned 3 more sequels and several high-profile films, television and animation shows, and it continued to infiltrate culture at a profound level, even beyond George Lucas's original 6 films. These 2 robots, these creations if you will, are modelled on the 2 thieves that appear in Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress, and they provide not only identification throughout the film, but, as Lucas himself confirmed, they were to make their way through all of the subsequent film instalments, prequels and sequels. They were designed by Ralph McQuarrie, and the mechanical sidekicks themselves echoed a range of cinematic influences apart from Kurosawa, from the Art Deco style of Lang's Metropolis, to the personality dynamics and the distinctive physical disparities of comedians Laurel and Hardy. Lucas at that time was a highly regarded filmmaker and was part of the American New Hollywood film movement of the 1970s. Now this was a very special time within mainstream Hollywood film, which is all about raising Hollywood film to the status of art. But compared to previous films, THX 1138 and American Graffiti, where he had taken risks with form and style, critics felt that Star Wars was more of a regressive step, which returned power to the studios and rejected the experimentation and the more personal stories that had defined mainstream cinema of that time. So that's the signified. So what does it mean? What's the symbolic meaning? What can we draw from this? What does that image represent? What connotations can be attached to that? Well, combining what we now know, we can then undertake a reading of the photograph as a sign, for the image really can be seen as a signal of a beginning and an end. C-3PO and R2-D2's image backdropped the popular culture of 1977. It inspired thousands of filmmakers and laid the seed for the fan cultures of today. It also defined what a contemporary franchise could achieve and how it could be constructed within industrial Hollywood. Thus it also became a shorthand for the contemporary blockbuster itself. That image heralded a new model of commercial filmmaking that supplanted simplicity and certainty over the ambiguity and complexity of new Hollywood films like The Godfather and The French Connection. And it ushered in a cinematic sensibility which today is defined by a kind of nostalgia that has remained in place to this day. So as you can see there, once you establish the context, what seems like a pretty straightforward image from Star Wars can contain resonances, a symbolic meaning, all of which can only be found if you get the context right.